All right, I'm Alex D'Arteria. With me is Jack, and we're going to ask him a few questions about Chernobyl and nuclear power. All right, describe for our audience your job and your experience with nuclear power.
In the nuclear field, I'm a field service representative. I've been doing it for about 40 years in the
Mhm.
electrical power generation business. Any sort of power generation using the nuclear steam cycle. As a services guy, I've traveled around the five continents where electricity is generated within that nuclear steam cycle. So basically just big steam plants, and they happen to use nuclear fission to actually generate electricity for the heat. And that's about it. I've just been doing it for a long time and have worked on various components in those different reactor types. And in America, there's four vendors that actually built reactors in America. There's Westinghouse, Combustion Engineering, and Babcock and Wilcox, and those are the pressurized water reactor um, system providers. They call them NSSS, Nuclear Steam Supply. And then the one that I've worked in the least, but I've probably been to six or so different units, are the BWR, boiling water reactors. So PWR, BWR, and those are all to date have been provided by General Electric. So you got Westinghouse, Combustion Engineering, Babcock, Wilcox, and General Electric were the companies that actually provided the reactor components for those style of reactors, PWRs and BWRs. I've worked in every type there and several other types overseas, including in Canada, the CANDU reactors. It's a little exotic.
Oh, okay. Are you familiar with the flawed design of the Chernobyl plant?
I'm not that familiar. It's an interesting thing. It's quite a primitive, relatively primitive. It's an early generation two reactor design. Um, you could point out that there's no containment building. So
Mhm.
that's like one of the things that comes to mind right away. Why would you have a reactor without a containment building? Kind of strange. The other thing is they have it's kind of a dated technology, super dated technology. You're using graphite moderated reactor. So that's RBMK has been around, is probably the designs from, gosh, it even seems like the late 50s. I don't think that there's a reactor. There may be a test reactor that's graphite moderated, but you're talking about Chicago pile days, back in the early days that we actually were experimenting with using graphite moderated reactors. So we don't do that in the United States. Like I said, I think there's one somewhere that's like a test reactor out west, but I haven't, but they don't generate. It's a really small. I know too, not only was there no containment building, it's kind of outdated technology. There's no conventional reactor pressure vessel, which we have in our units. So that was kind of weird, a lot of concrete, but and water, but not a lot of there's no containment. And we use reactor pressure vessel as a primary containment method. You have the reactor, you have the actual containment building. This is usually a cylinder. And then within it, you've got a reactor pressure vessel, which is cylindrical, but it's, really thick metal, low alloy steel that's been plated and then been cladded. And then you have the fuel itself, which is also one of the primary barriers for preventing fuel or highly contaminated material from leaving. So you've got at least those three things going on, and these guys seem to have been lacking at least two of them. So yeah, 2 out of 3. that I pointed out. And then there's always your operating instructions. And I think the biggest thing is they had poorly trained personnel.
Yeah.
And also they went off script when they were conducting that testing evolution that they went through. So there were a lot of factors, and I'm sure there have been 100 different evaluations of what went wrong. But those are the things I would point out. No conventional reactor pressure vessel, no containment building, and I think the poorly trained personnel, I think, were the biggest things. And they walked off their script when they were during their exercise that they went through prior to there being a loss of coolant accident. So,
Okay. Can you describe how radiation affects the human body and electrical components?
and electrical radiation affects the human body and electrical components. Okay, human body. So there are four primary radiological or radiation sources that people are concerned with, and health physics department, that's what they call them, health physicists and health physics technicians are concerned with for personnel working at a reactor. And the acronym we usually use in the industry is called BANG. It's just an easy way to remember them. So you have in the B, you've got beta, and then you have alpha for the A, the N is neutron, and G is gamma. I would guess that 99% of all the dose that's accrued to personnel is measured at the gamma. So mostly what we deal with is gamma. So it's similar to X-rays. And it's that's the penetrating radiation that travels a good distance. Now beta is just electron-like. It travels maybe 3 feet. So we don't, it's not highly penetrating. Alpha is just a helium-4 nucleus, two protons, 2 neutrons, and it doesn't travel but an inch or two in space. It's primarily, if you ingest it, it can cause some problems, not the individual atom, but actually material that's going through alpha decay. And then you can have damage to tissue because very ionizing. Neutron, we don't really deal with unless the reactor is operating. So I've been monitored for neutron, but I don't think I have any neutron dose that's been ascribed to me. So, and so those are the three or the four that we deal with. There's another one, heavy ions, but I haven't actually had to deal with that in my line of work. But gamma is the primary, and gamma, well, I said was heavy penetrator. So concrete, plastic, water. Water shields are really good for shielding gamma. Just a couple feet of that, and you could effectively eliminate most all gamma. Now, the effect on the human body can be significant if you're in a high radiation field with gamma. And that's probably a lot of what you hear when those people were dying overseas. They're probably in a high radiation field, a lot of gamma, probably many are. In the conventional electrical production reactor, you're not going to get very much gamma dose. So I think the average American nuclear worker is probably somewhere in the few hundreds of millirem is how they measure it per year in dose. So you're not going to really see an effect on the body. But when you get up to 100 rem, which is many times more than you could ever be allowed to have, even in a lifetime, you're not going to typically get that unless you're in some sort of accident. And usually a lot of the accidents where people have a lot of dose is going to be when they are handling X-ray or some other type of source. But in a electrical nuclear reactor, you're probably not going to be around a significant emitter such that you would get a high amount of gamma. But anyway, if you get something like 100 rem, that's when your blood, leukocytes, I believe, white blood cell count is changed. And around 200 millirem, you start getting a lot more involved in calculating the rate of death. And a lot of the people that you see probably at Chernobyl that actually did die, and I can't remember the number, I think it was under 30 people that died directly or within a few weeks or so. They probably got a very large dose of radiation, started getting radiation sickness, and typically it just the gamma would interact with your cells and things would start dying off within the cells, and then they'd start working improperly. So they wouldn't regenerate as they should. And so as a result, your tissues start breaking down, a lot of blood, a lot of hemorrhaging, and it's a very, very ugly scene. There's not much you can do if somebody's getting a lethal dose, and that's probably what they had to go through. And it's a very ugly death.
Yeah. And as we've seen with Chernobyl and stuff, a lot of the electronics that they took down into the reactor or trying to clean up did not work.
Yeah, that's right. If you go and take electrical components, and that's the second half of that question, what's the effect on electrical components, high radiation, like the cameras that you would use, like if you were looking through a camera and you were doing what we're doing, which is communicating via video, it would start sparkling typically when it gets into a high radiation field. And then it would probably start browning out. The lens would look like it's browning out, and then it would completely go out completely. So that's when you got to go back to your vacuum tube technology. If there's any way that you can actually image or control something remotely using hydraulics, which aren't affected by high radiation, pneumatics, to actually manipulate a gripper, say for instance. But cameras are a little trickier, but you can use fiber optic cameras that aren't going to be affected as much by high radiation. So there's things you can do to get around that. But yeah, what happens to the body also happens to materials that are introduced into a high radiation field, and they start acting up and failing in the same way your tissue fails in your body. So very similar.
I believe you've already asked or answered my next question about what they could prevent or limit the disaster at Chernobyl.
Yeah. The reactor pressure vessel and modern having a modern containment. The modern containment in itself probably would have done them fine, and nobody would have had an issue, and maybe nobody would have died. That's something that they had at Fukushima, for example. Mm-hmm. Obviously, better training, especially for the reactor plant operators, and actually their nuclear safety culture. That's something they promote heavily in the United States, conservative decision making, but that all comes with expertise and better training for their plant operators. And I think there is a lot of arrogance on the head people that were actually in charge of like what we would call the guy who's the reactor control supervisor. He was out of his element, and he shouldn't have been doing what he was doing at the time that they going through that training or the testing that they were performing. So
Yeah.
seemed to me.
Is burying contaminated topsoil really the best option for a safe disposal of nuclear waste?
That's a good question. And I don't know the answer. I've worked in with rad waste before. I know that as a principle of radioactive working in the rad waste field, you need to concentrate and contain it. So you can take topsoil that's contaminated, and that happens not just in the United States, where we have super sites, actually, contaminated material could be chemical as well, biological or radiological. But you've got to contain it, and then you've got to separate it away from the good and get it somewhere. Another method of is vitrification. So when you actually you have a atomic bomb test. My father was at the test site back in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. And at some of these nuclear bombs, especially the ones that were atmospheric specifically, the bomb blast would have so much heat that it would vitrify. You'd actually go out into the deserts of Nevada, and the sand would be turned into glass. And you can actually get some of that. They sell it on, I'm sure they sell it on eBay. But you can get that stuff. And that's another method of capturing the contaminated material, is just turn it into a glass block and bury it. Again, you'd be burying it or putting it into a block until it disintegrated down enough to where it's safe for people to be around it. As far as, topsoil, burying it, I don't know. I couldn't really speak to that. It's not really my strength, is talking about radioactive material for long term. I can tell you, we really need to have a high level. That's usually low level stuff. When you have contaminated sand, we do need high level storage in the United States, and there was one built, a facility out in Nevada, but I guess Nevada, Harry Reid and others decided that you didn't want to store any highly radioactive material there. So everybody's been forced to store the fuel from the reactors on site. So anyway, yeah, as far as the sand goes, I don't know what the best thing is for storing it or getting rid of it. I think eventually they'll come up with I think there is probably a process that's probably cost prohibitive right now for taking any material and turning it into something that is innocuous and isn't damaging to the human body and doesn't emit large amounts of contaminant or radiation. But that's probably in the not so far future, within 100 years. If you can think of 100 years ago, talking about reactors and people talking on these cell phones, never, not in a million years, or us even communicating over the internet. Nope. Going to space. Nope. None of that. But now, 100 years from now, they'll be able to do lots of stuff that would be mind blowing.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
In your professional opinion, what are the similarities between the Chernobyl disaster and the Fukushima plant?
Both a lot of units became inoperable at Fukushima and obviously at Chernobyl. I think both released radiation into the environment. Fukushima, I can't remember, maybe a tenth, maybe, if that, that really was a tenth as much contamination was released into the environment as Chernobyl. And since they were near the water, a lot of that just got dissolved or diluted anyway into the ocean, which just disappears. After a while, you can't even track it. It's the same with the environmental testing. I used to take environmental radioactivity and radiological safety classes. a long time ago. And on campus, we actually could track nuclear tests from 20 or 30 years ago, extremely minute amounts, but you can actually tell when you're sampling that a radioactive cloud was passing through, but it's so fine. It's like a breath in a large volume of air. It's hardly there, but you can detect it, and you can actually tell what blast it was from, some years, some decades, even later. And I'm not sure that's still possible, but it was a while back when I was taking classes. So, yeah. So anyway, the Fukushima emitted just a fraction of Chernobyl's. Both release radiation into the environment, and in both cases, they're unrecoverable as far as being able to go in and redo them and get them back online. So they just had a lot of major damage. But I think the two are different as far as deaths and also the effect. So there's a ton of differences, but similarities, just equipment damage, a lot of equipment damage. Plants became inoperable. But other than that, I mean, there's a lot of differences. And I think the biggest thing, it's just, man, seismically, those plants are fine, Fukushima. But the tsunami is what killed them.
Yeah.
It's the damage from the tsunami. Nobody saw that there. That seismic wave would come in, seismic generated wave come in, 100-foot wave coming at you. And the way that they had their cooling was kind of bizarre as well. So that was kind of the oddball. And those are boiling water reactors like General Electric produced here in America, which is about a third of the fleet, well, maybe a little bit less. Or about that, a third of the fleet, maybe 30 reactors here in America are boiling water reactors out of the 100 or so, a little less than 100. So yeah, they had, now they've changed because of Fukushima. All plants had to get Fukushima mods and go through this, what they call flex training and stuff like that. So if there's a disaster at one plant, there's some infrastructure that can be deployed in order to mitigate some of the damage and inoperability of a plant. So it's an interesting thing that they've gone through to mitigate. And they also did the same thing. They're called TMI mods. So after the TMI disaster, where that whole unit was just trashed by, again, I think is a prideful operator in the control room who didn't follow they're out of their script again. And they didn't follow what Babcock and Wilcox asked them to do. And what it ended up doing is they overrode some of their controls, safety measures. And when you do that, you're out of your league. That's not where you go. Yeah. You can't stop a wave from running in onto the beach. So don't try, So that was what happened at TMI. So there were, because of that TMI incident, all the plants in the country had to put in like post-accident sampling systems and a few other things to mitigate what happened there. Same thing with Fukushima, because all the plants in the United States have spent tons of money and to prove to the NRC, hey, what's going to happen if you had a Fukushima-like event? Well, we're in the middle of the land, there's not going to be anything like that. Well, what about your seismic restraints? I mean, what kind of a program? Blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of good that comes out of it, even though it can be quite costly. And but they've spent a lot of time, a lot of money to analyze and see what we can do better in the States because of these incidences. And the same thing with Chernobyl too, though that was less of a lessons learned because it's just such an oddball plant uh, relative to what we have in the States. So.
All right. Is the contaminated water in the tanks of Fukushima a danger to animal life or the environment if released into the ocean?
Yeah. So what's inside those tanks? Do you know?
I know that it's supposed to be contaminated water from the plant
Yeah.
that had not been, I guess, the cooling system.
Okay. If it is a reactor coolant and if you just dumped it into the bay, it would probably be gone pretty quick. So probably wouldn't be, definitely probably not a long-term thing.
Mhm.
If it's just reactor coolant, shouldn't impact animal life. I would guess it might impact individuals that fish for a week. The fall, I give it a week and it'll all be gone. The ocean is a very vast, vast body of water, and it just eats up everything. I remember the oil spill and the BP oil spill in the Gulf,
Mhm.
and everybody was like, oh man, this is a huge volume of oil that's going to come ashore, and we're going to see the likes of which we've never seen damage to our shoreline. And then nothing ever showed up because the ocean is full of oil already. It comes through the bottom, through vents in the bottom of the ocean
Mhm.
in vast, vast quantities. And everybody's like, well, what happened to it? Well, it just got dissipated by the ocean in the Gulf and never came ashore. So that's exactly what would happen there. That would just disappear. You never hear about it. There's worse stuff lurking in the oceans where I think people have dumped their old reactor submarines with the reactors maybe on board and just dumped them into a trench or something. There's probably worse stuff out there,
Yeah.
I'm sure, including nuclear bombs.
All right. Well, this is an odd question, but there's a
Is it?
rumor. Yeah, there's a rumor that aliens helped the Soviet Union clean up after Chernobyl. What is your opinion on that? Do you have any opinion that aliens would come down and
Alien
help us?
connection. I've never been to Area 51, but my father had. Nevada is, I don't know, it's somewhere 80 some odd percent is owned by the federal government. So you have Department of Energy, Department of Defense, Bureau of Land Management. It has 60 some odd percent of it. So as far as aliens helped, after the incident, the problem I think was quickly determined to be a civil engineering project. Again, the same ideas. You want to concentrate whatever is out there, contamination, bring it into one location and contain it. So now they're building a containment after the fact. They should have had a containment to begin with. So now they're containing everything that was wrong, dumping everything in and trying to contain it. And so that's a civil engineering project. I don't know if aliens would be required. I think the Soviet Union, the Russians have a pretty good handle on large civil engineering projects, but that's just my opinion.
Okay. If Russia bombs Chernobyl, during their attack on Ukraine, uh, would it release more radiation from Chernobyl, or do you think it will just be fine? Like I'm talking direct hit on the dome that covers Chernobyl reactors.
Yeah, I don't think it's much of a dome, but I would think that if they cut off the cooling to the reactor and it's running full tilt, actually, if typically if you have even a seismic event, then your reactor shuts down. I know that's what happened in North Anna when we had it here in Virginia. The reactor shut down automatically. I don't know if they have that over there. If you have bombs falling, does the reactor just scram, which means shuts down, all the control rods are inserted.
Well, the Chernobyl
Poison.
site it's not operational at all. No reactors are running
Oh,
anymore.
if they, you're
Yeah.
talking about, okay, you're talking about the one that was damaged. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that unit. Yeah, you could do something. If they wanted to do it, it wouldn't get much bang for the buck.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think there would be much you could do there. Yeah, a bunker buster type thing. I don't even know what you would do, but yeah.
They're better off just putting a nuclear bomb down there or just blowing up nuclear bomb, you're saying?
Yeah, I think you would just drop a nuke. They got lots of them, and just blame it on the Chernobyl that they accidentally blew up Chernobyl, but it actually was a nuclear bomb. Yeah, I can't imagine that doing much of anything, even if there was a fire, which tends to spread effluents throughout the atmosphere.
Mhm.
And that's where you get a lot of stuff. You get stuff burning. That stuff goes in the atmosphere, including the radioactive material. And that can be one of your main drivers. And then unless you get some rain or something from the atmosphere actually driving the contamination down, it can spread. So yeah, I would say I would just drop a bomb and just blame it on Chernobyl if I were the Russians. So what would it do the Ukraine with the radiation? I don't think it would do much. I really don't. You'd really have to churn that baby up like an egg beater,
Yeah.
Just wouldn't kick out like it did when it was burning and blowing up. So that's my opinion.
All right. One last question. Is nuclear power safe?
Yeah, I'd say yes. More safe as time passes. We're in the generation 2 phase. And actually, Chernobyl was the first generation 2 design. So we're still in Gen 2 plus, Gen 2 in the United States. They'll be replaced by reactors before too long. Our designs are better, safer. I don't think they care a lot about people in Russia traditionally. They just throw masses of human beings at whatever they got going on. Chinese do something similar too. I think you're saying nuclear power. So I know a local company is actually designing a nuclear reactor, a couple of them, one for rocket flights for space powered propulsion. You're talking about space aliens earlier. This is for the Mars mission. So they're actually, it's Babcock and Wilcox, and they're building for onboard power as well. So they've got propulsion and they've got onboard power, and they're trying to get the spacecraft there quicker. How can they do that? They need power. They also need to be able to stop because they want to travel at high velocities, and then they want to be able to stop it so it doesn't overshoot, be lost forever. So yeah, I think nuclear power is safe. We've got a good run with it so far, but we've only been at it for not very long, and we've actually got some old designs out there, and they've been pretty safe. Our experience in America has been really good. 100, even more than 100 reactors were operating at once. You had one big issue, and nobody died as a result of it because of the safety that's inherent in the American designs. Now, worldwide can't really speak to that because people have different standards. Countries have different standards. Having traveled all over the place, South America, Africa, Asia, Europe. You go to Europe, it's a very different situation than if you go to Africa or even South America. It's very different standards. And Russia, I think, as you could see with them invading Ukraine, you think the big Russian bear is going to take over the country easily. I think you see that a lot of bluff in there. And I think there's also a lot of bluff in their reactor designs as well, at least traditionally, and some of their other tech too.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jack. That was very informative. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm
And
sorry I'm not as good a speaker as yourself.
oh, well, thank you. Uh,
And I enjoyed your show too on Blackbeard. Very much so.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you. And yeah, so